It started a week ago, out of the blue. One day, I woke up and there was less of me than the night before. The first time that it happened, I woke up missing a finger, my left index. There were no signs of it being cut, removed, or damaged. The finger was simply there one night, and gone the next. The unexplained disappearance did put me into a bit of a panic. Unfortunately, the ER wasn't much help. I don't think the doctor believed me when I showed him my hand and told him that there used to be another finger there. My hand had no scar, no evidence that something was taken. There was only an absence. The doctor was kind about it, suggested that I should see a therapist and even gave me a few numbers to call. I took a personal day and I spent it at home in bed, alternating between mindless Netflix watching and staring at my now unfamiliar hand. I knew with absolute certainty that a piece of me was taken while I was sleeping. Actually, more than one piece was missing. Besides the finger, some memories were gone. Obviously, I was distracted by my missing digit for most of the day, so it didn't dawn on me until later that other things were removed. Sometime around lunch, I considered calling my parents to tell them what was happening. But as I picked up the phone with my complete hand, and I tried to piece together how I would explain the day that I was having, it struck me that I couldn't remember exactly what my parents looked like. I couldn't remember their names either. I could remember their voices, what my childhood home looked like, even my mom's favorite movie. But I couldn't catch a clear memory of my parents. They were always at the edge of my memory, like a dream dissolving in the morning sun. Speaking of dreams, I did remember having a vivid nightmare right before my finger was taken. The feeling of the dream stayed with me, but the details were burned away. I kept trying to bring it back. It felt like the nightmare and my missing finger, my lost memories were all connected. Yet no matter how hard I struggled, I could not pin down the dream. Frustrated beyond my limit, I quietly decided that I was going crazy. I didn't want to burden my parents with my breakdown, and so instead of calling them, I called my office and I took off the rest of the week. It was sudden and disruptive, but at least I had time off to burn. I hoped a few days of rest would coax my sanity back to me. I went out to the liquor store, keeping my left hand in my pocket, and bought a week's worth of bottled therapy. The rest of the afternoon, I spent getting beautifully, stunningly drunk. My last thought before passing out was that, of all the things you might wake up missing, one finger was hardly the end of the world. The next morning, I woke up without my right eye. At first, I blamed my unusual vision on the Navy's worth of rum that I'd had the night before. But when I dragged myself in the bathroom, the mirror held a terrible correction. My reflection stared back at me with one green eye and one empty socket. Even the remaining numbness of the rum was no comfort. I screamed until I was raw, until my voice became another one of my missing things, and though at least that came back later. I'm glad that I have no close neighbors. I wouldn't wish the sound of me that morning on anyone. Once I pulled myself together, more or less, I tried to objectively assess my new reality. Like my finger, the eye was gone with no sign of damage or injury. If you hadn't known me before, one might assume that I was born with only the one eye, and that the empty socket with its deflated lid was just a genetic inheritance. But I knew that it wasn't true. I took the best inventory of me as possible, under the circumstances, and found the I wasn't the only new loss that I had to reckon with. My memories of college were mostly gone. Gone also were a dozen other moments I was certain I would recall just the day before. I couldn't tell you my middle name. I couldn't remember the name of the first girl that I had kissed. Everything that was me was being chipped away. I was unraveling. And much like the day before, I carried the certainty of a forgotten nightmare, a repeat of the first. Nothing I tried could bring the details into focus. It was like trying to watch a movie underwater. All that came back to me were silhouettes and a sense of movement. That and the lingering impression of fear and a terrible sadness. I found myself crying in the bathroom, tears falling silently from my one remaining eye. The rest of the day was spent in shell-shock wanderings, haunting my own house like a living ghost. I paced from room to room, aimless. My house is large with more rooms than I need. It's on a farm and it belonged to my grandparents before their passing. The walls are old and familiar. The floor is well-worn wood dotted with an island of soft rugs. Everything about the house used to bring me comfort, but I was hollow that day. I didn't bother to eat or read or go for a walk in the nearby forest, which always brought me peace. I couldn't even work up the energy to drink myself dumb. The only way I could process my slow disintegration was to shut my mind off. I stayed awake for as long as I could. It was pushing 48 hours before I couldn't fight it anymore and I fell asleep, slumped in a dining room chair. When I woke up, I found out that whatever was happening to me, it was accelerating. I held my left hand up, shaking. Another finger and a thumb were missing. I was now down a few toes as well. Exploring with my tongue, I counted 4 missing teeth. I wondered when I would hit the breaking point when my body could suffer no more missing pieces. Just like each morning before, I woke, still feeling the echoes of a dream that I could not recall. That was a rough morning. I sat at the table for hours, counting and recounting my losses like a general after an ugly defeat. But I wasn't going to have 2 hopeless days in a row. I roused myself before noon, had a few drinks, and then brought my laptop out to the living room. I set out to sit and drink and research, all the while watching the autumn rain glaze my window. After an hour, I was slightly drunk, highly determined and completely lost. Googling stolen body parts was predictably unhelpful. I was constantly redirected to articles about organ harvesting. And since I wasn't waking up in a bathtub full of ice each morning, I doubted any of that information would be useful. As I got up to fix another drink, which amounted to rum garnished with a lonely ice cube, I froze. What if I was missing an organ? Would I even be able to tell until it was too late? I gingerly pressed against my stomach. Everything still seemed to be there. I figured if something important was missing, it wouldn't take long for me to notice its absence. Outside, the sky began to fade to dark, casting shadows through my house. I pulled myself away from my computer screen long enough to move from room to room, flicking switches and turning on lamps. My goal was to ward off sleep again for as long as possible. The entire house was swollen with light. When I got back to the table, I dropped into my chair and I stared at the computer screen. I just felt numb. The truth was, my failing body was the latest in a long line of spirit-breaking bullshit, and the cumulative depression was becoming too heavy to carry. Some days it felt like I was crawling across an endless beach, and the sand kept getting harder to move through the further that I went. I rarely saw my family, sometimes just a phone call on the holidays. I had cut out all social contact years ago. Somewhere in my 20s, friendships just became too much work for me to keep up with. And relationships, those always seemed to end ugly. I realized that I was the common denominator in all of those failures. And so for the past 2 or 3 years, I've built my life around work and hobbies. I put myself into emotional quarantine because there was a perverse comfort in the isolation. But now that my world was falling apart around me, my body disappearing, I felt so alone. One night in the near future, whatever is taking pieces of me might take something that I need, my brain, my spine, my heart, and then I'll be dead and nobody will know until my office starts to wonder where I've been and send somebody to check. The thought of lying dead at my house for a week or more with no one the wiser nearly broke me. I tried to focus on a positive thought, but I struggled to find any warm memories to hold on to. Maybe those memories were another piece of me taken in the night, or maybe they had never been in the first place. I looked at the ruin of my left hand, and I considered ending it all right there. There were pills in the bathroom, whiskey on the table. I even had a gun in a lockbox under my bed. I hesitated, and despite the circumstances, I found that I wasn't ready to go. At the very least, I wanted to know what was happening to me, why it was happening to me. The only clue I had was the fading echo of that dream every morning. I tried forcing myself to remember, but my mind could find no purchase. The dream was close enough to chase, but too far to catch. I said. I went back to my computer and I searched Dreamcatcher. I spent 40 minutes learning about dreamcatchers, their history, intended use, and how to make one. They were originally created to hang above the beds of sleeping children, to ward off bad dreams and evil spirits. I figured that it couldn't hurt to try. Half an hour later, I set my ad hoc dreamcatcher on the table. I didn't have string or yarn, so I would have to use dental floss, woven through the frame of an old, stringless tennis racket. The final effect was completely ridiculous. "This is bullshit," I said out loud to my empty house. I went to crack my knuckles, and I remembered that several were missing, and decided my entire week was bullshit. So maybe the dreamcatcher was the answer to all my problems. Even though, as far as I could tell, dreamcatchers weren't supposed to actually catch dreams so you could remember them, just to trap bad dreams. Close enough, I muttered to myself, sitting the dreamcatcher on the table next to my computer. I poured another drink, shaking the nearly empty bottle sadly. I knew that I made a pitiful sight, alone in my old house, wearing old flannel pajama bottoms and a scruffy t-shirt. I decided to dive into some more research, see if there was something that I had missed, some silver bullet to bring my body and mind back to me. I must have blacked out again because I woke up to the bright sting of sunshine, and I was outdoors. "What?" I mumbled. As I shook off the haze of sleep, I realized I was in a park. There were no parks near my house, but this one still looked familiar, all green and gently shadowed by tall oaks. I saw a dirt trail winding through into a wooded space and a large playground in the distance. It looked like the old style of playground, all metal and wood and good memories. The kind of playground where you would spend hours as a kid, bumping and falling your way through a summer afternoon. There is a figure swinging on the swing set. Having no better ideas, I began walking down the trail towards the playground. I knew this park, and the farther I walked, the clearer my memory became. This was the park near where I grew up, where I played as a kid, and where I spent more than a few nights hanging out with friends in high school. It was even the place that I had my first kiss. I was 14 and her name was Cassidy. Her face came into my mind vividly. I wasn't sure why the feeling was so strong until I drew close to the playground and recognized the figure on the swing. "Hey, Cass," I said, standing behind her. She turned to face me but kept swinging. "Hey, stranger." I think I gasped. There were lines and thin cracks all over her face, like broken pottery glued back together. Cass dug her heels into the ground, stopping her swing. "It's rude to stare," she told me. "Sorry," I said, still staring. Besides all the cracks and lines, her face looked how I remembered her, only older. Her hair was chopped short and blonde now. When we dated, she used to change the color often. I remembered red being her favorite. Cass had delicate features and her nose had a small tilt to it, from when her dad broke it when she was a kid and it healed off center. She smiled sadly at me, keeping her mouth closed like she always did, shy about her teeth being a little crooked on the bottom row. I'd always found her imperfections cute, and I used to try very hard to surprise her, to get her to smile or laugh unabashedly. Sometimes she would, but only if we were the only ones around. Eventually, I collected myself and I stopped staring. It was warm in the park and it felt like summer, even though it was November. Despite the heat, Cass wore an oversized dark blue hoodie. I realized that it was one of mine that I had given her years ago. "How have you been?" I asked, kind of stupidly. She shrugged and then went back to swinging. Not having a better plan, I sat in the swing next to her and I kicked off lightly. I noticed her hands in the chain of the swing had the same lines and cracks as her face. It reminded me of a puzzle. We swung in silence for a while. "The park looks nice," I said. "The trees look very green, for November, you know." "You always say that," Cass replied. I stopped swinging. "What do you mean? When did I say that before?" "Last night," Cass said, still gently moving through the air. "And the night before and the night before that. Every night for quite some time. I'm not sure exactly how long." "I'm dreaming," I said. "Yes. This is the dream that I have every night since." I glanced at my left hand with its missing digits. I've heard that some people who lose limbs are whole when they dream, but apparently I carried my losses with me even in my mind. "Yeah," Cass told me. "This is the same dream and we have the same conversation. Well, at least it usually starts the same." I'm confused. Is this just a dream? Is any of this real? Cass stopped swinging again. She sighed. Fat white clouds floated in the sky above us. One crossed the sun and pulled a shadow over the entire park. We sat for a moment, listening to the birds call to each other in the trees. A blue and yellow finch landed on the top of the nearby seesaw. Even in the shade, the air in the park was warm and smelled like grass and wildflowers. "It's a dream, but real, I think," Cass said finally. "Real enough. This is where I came to after my fall." She traced the path of one of the lines on her cheek. "I remember the fall, and then I remember waking up here in our old park. That was a mindfuck. I'm not sure how long I was here alone before you started showing up. Not long." Her fall. The thin cracks like broken pottery all across her face. "Cass, are you dead?" I asked. She smiled, but only barely. "You always ask that too." "Am I dead?" Her smile dropped. "No, not yet at least." "I'm dying, aren't I?" I asked. "The pieces of me that keep disappearing. Eventually, I'll be gone." "Yes, I'm afraid so." "Then what?" Cass nodded towards the woods. "I think you'll end up here, like I did." She started swinging again. I got off my swing and I sat down across from her, on the edge of a merry-go-round. "What happened to you, Cass?" "It's a long story. The short version is that I got in a bad way. Couldn't find a way out, so I stepped off a building." "What's the long version?" I asked. I paused. "You've had to tell me this story several times, haven't you?" She nodded and smiled, this time almost a full smile. After we went our separate ways, the next few guys I was with weren't great. My dad got sick, so I stayed with my parents for a few years. Mom was too strung out to be much help. I started using too, just trying to find a little bit of peace now and then. It didn't help much. The years just kept slipping by. There were times that I would tell myself that it wouldn't be that way forever, that I could climb out. But each day, it felt like a little more of me was used up. I couldn't find a way out, and one day, not too long ago, I guess I woke up just hurting too much. Cass slowed her swinging until she was rocking with her heels on the ground. "I'm so sorry, Cass," I told her. "Thank you. I know you mean that, just like I know what you're going to ask next. You want to know why you're here." I smiled. "You know me, always gotta grab the spotlight." I gestured to the playground and the park behind me. "This, whatever this is, whether it's your own piece of heaven, or well, whatever this is, it seems like it's yours. Why am I here? And why am I..." I held up what was left of my left hand. Cass stood up. "Before I tell you, let me show you something. It's kind of upsetting, so just prepare yourself, okay?" She began walking farther into the playground and I followed. We went around the monkey bars and past the jungle gym until we reached a patch of asphalt. This was the place that I used to draw with chalk when I was a kid, to play foursquare or hopscotch. There was chalk on the asphalt now, but this time it was in the outline of a body. Within the white lines, there were a few body parts laying on the ground in the appropriate places. Some fingers, some teeth. I recognized the single green eye staring blankly up into the sky as my own. I screamed for a long time. At some point, I sat on the ground next to the chalk outline. Cass hesitantly put a hand on my shoulder, and then she sat down next to me and wrapped me in a hug. She rocked me back and forth. I cried. The weight of the last few days, maybe the last few years, cracked something inside of me, but it felt good to be held. "Thanks," I said. "I think I'm okay now." Cass pulled away but still sat close enough that our arms were touching. "I hate to tell you this next part." "Why?" I asked. "Because I hate hurting you. But this..." She pointed at the outline with the pieces of my body inside. "I'm pretty sure it's my fault." I stared at her. "How? Why?" "Because I was lonely, maybe. Or because I was still hurting." We were just kids," I said. "I'm sorry, but it was so long ago." "I know," Cass said. "I forgave you a long time ago for leaving, for lying, for everything." I winced. Cassidy and I had dated all through high school, but I went away to college and she stayed in town. We grew apart, or at least I did, but I had a hard time ending it. She was always so happy to see me when I came back to visit, but my mind was never entirely there. I felt like my life was moving on, but I didn't know how to tell her. And so I dragged and I came up with excuses, and I visited less and less. I had a fling with a classmate and I confessed. Cass forgave me and then I did it again. Eventually, I was the one to end the relationship. If it sounds like I was a piece of shit, it's because I was. The only excuse that I can offer is that I was young and I had always hated myself a little bit. Those excuses sound empty, even to me. Screwing up my own life was one thing, but I've always felt guilty that I took Cass along for the ride. "If you forgave me, then why bring me here?" I asked. Cass reached over and placed her hand over my damaged one. "It wasn't a conscious decision, please know that. It's just, you know how people say your whole life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die? It didn't, at least for me. Only the good parts, the bright parts, came back to me while I was falling. And you were in every one of those memories. Us here, at the park at night, or on days when we had nothing else to do. Or that trip that we took down to the ocean, July of sophomore year." Cass was crying silently, the tears running along the broken lines in her face. I felt sick for all the pain that I had caused her all those years ago. "The main thing I remember, right before was our senior prom," Cass said, wiping absently at her eyes. "Do you remember?" For a panicked instant, I was afraid that I didn't. But then I looked at Cass and it was like looking back through time. I could picture her clearly in her yellow dress. I could see her face as she was then, with no scars or lines. She had smiled in the picture that my mom took of us that night. Truly smiled. No hidden teeth. "I remember," I told her. "I wore a yellow tie to match your dress, and I accidentally sat on your corsage. I felt bad because I ruined it." "You didn't ruin it," Cass told me. "I liked that it looked different from all the other flowers. Being mushed gave it a personality." She paused. "I kept it. I don't know if I told you before, but I kept the corsage. I dried it out in a box in my room. It's still there, unless my parents cleaned things out after I..." Her voice broke and she started to sob. Now I was the one who drew her in close, wrapped my arms around her, and I put my forehead against hers. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to bring you here. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt you. Please believe me." I did. She looked up at me and touched the temple near my missing eye. "I'm so sorry for everything that is happening to you. I think I'm just sinking and you're caught in the drag. I don't know how to stop it. I keep trying. Whatever's happening seems to have its own momentum. But none of this is because I want to be cruel. I left the world lonely and scared, and in my final moments, all I could think about was how happy you made me, how real you made me feel. Even with all of the bad that came after, you gave me my best for years. From the moment I met you until you left, her voice cracked again. I felt loved for the first time in my life. My mom was too far gone and my dad too angry. I was never much good at making friends. But you showed up with your bad jokes and your quick laugh, and your troublemaking ideas that you always included me in, and I believed. I believed that life, like stories, might sometimes have a happy ending. So when it didn't, when I took that last step, all I could think about was how much I wished things were different. How much I wished we could have just stayed young and in love forever. And I guess something out there heard me. And I'm sorry. I kissed her. I could taste salt from where she had been crying. It felt good. It felt like going home. Cass kissed me back. "Did you know that I was going to do that?" I asked. She shook her head. "This is actually the first time you did that." "Well," I said, "recent experiences have led to me slowly developing new perspectives. Plus, you look pretty good in my hoodie." Cass laughed. "Bullshit, this is my jacket. Now this we have been over." I pulled at the excess fabric around the hoodie. "You're like 100 pounds soaking wet, and this is at least a men's large. There has certainly been a theft." Cass punched my arm smiling, but it faded. "I'm sorry. You had your whole life ahead of you. I didn't mean to drag you down with me." I looked around the park, alive with the sounds and scent of early summer. I watched animals dart around the trees, moving between the silky shadows. I turned to Cass, who, even with the scars of life and death etched on her face, looked beautiful. "There are worse places," I said. "Thank God your happiest memories weren't of us in a bowling alley or something." Her laugh again, and I couldn't help but laugh with her. "The sad thing is, you're not going to remember this conversation," Cass said. I thought about my silly little dream catcher at home. It probably wouldn't work, but maybe it would. Even if it didn't, I felt ready to remember. I would hold on to this memory, clutch it tightly when I woke up. I had let a lot of good things slip away in my life, but this dream wouldn't be one of them. "I'll remember," I promised. We sat there for a long time. The chalk outline didn't bother me much anymore. I knew the pieces of me in there weren't missing. They were just waiting for the rest of me. "Hey, what's here outside of the park?" I asked. "Is there a whole afterlife-y dream version of our hometown out there?" "I don't know," Cass said. "I haven't looked." "Why not?" "I don't want to leave the park in case you showed up, since I never knew when that would be," Cass said. I didn't want you to wake up here alone. Thanks, I told her. I wouldn't want that either. But we should go look to see if... That was the last thing I remember before waking up this morning. My right leg below the knee is gone. So is one ear, some fingers, more teeth. And I'm having trouble breathing, so I think it can add a lung to the list of parts waiting in the park. I don't know if the dream catcher really worked, or if I managed to keep my memory of the dream by brute force. But I remember all of it. I'm typing this out with my one good hand. The right hand is only missing the pinky so far. I want to leave this for anybody who comes looking for me. I want people to know that I was at peace with everything. I'll call my parents later, not to say goodbye, just to catch up, to let them know that I was thinking of them today, even if I can't quite recall their names. I don't know how long it'll take me to transition from here to the park. I'm hoping it'll be quick, that there won't be much pain. Whatever is happening seems to be happening faster every morning. I don't really think of this as an ending. It's more like going home.